Spilling the Astral Chalice is the second full-length album from Slovenian death metal band, progressive death metal band, avant-garde, blackened death metal band, Siderean. And if you're familiar with my coverage of them a couple of years ago, you'll note that this is one of my favorite modern bands in this particular style, which is they've made very much their own over the course of several years. This band was initially known as Teleport, and they had different members and different configurations, but essentially what this band started with was the logical continuation of what Teleport had been developing for about 10 years. And that is a style that started somewhere nearby, like Black Future era Vector, and evolved towards something that infused elements of Execration, Fedwen's End, Morbus Chron, modern death metal, touches, but also things like the chasm informed the movement of their sound, and there was a lot of really good things going into their music, and all of it was a little bit psychedelic. It was all a little bit out there, but it was also very aggressive and traditional in its treatment of the riff and death metal in general. And so they've become more abstract over time, and it was a big reveal when they finally came up with this music after kind of battling over the Teleport name and eventually landing upon this name and this presentation, which has always been very consistent from the start. So tons of hype around their first album. I am a huge fan of this band, admittedly. I believe I gave their first record a perfect 10. It was at the top of my top 75 albums of 2021. I interviewed the band twice, and again, the bias is certainly there. I'm very excited about this record. To get a good idea of what's different about this record in general, I would recommend listening to the last one, but also become familiar with Teleport. I think that band never really got their due, and the way they developed was pretty admirable over the years. So if you want that precedence, I've explored it in past reviews, and it's certainly worth visiting the development of this band because they weren't just a shot in the dark. They were developed over many years, and they've developed these skills in earnest, and there's a reason why they're at such a high level on this second record. So let's get an example of that here on a clip, and then we'll talk more about what this record is and how it's different from the last one. So there's no reason for a lot of pomp and bluster and a reintroduction to the band in their mind, I don't think, because they get right to it. They get right into the conversation and start ripping riffs within just about 15 seconds of the album starting. They're getting to their lyrics, they're working out a huge riff. There's this avant-garde and noisome bent to the mix and the sound of this record. Compared to Damien Herring's mastering of the last record, this one is a little bit more abrasive and abrupt, and also just a little bit more dynamic in general. So what we get is a recording that emphasizes this change in their sound, which is subtle in some aspect, but also it's bolder in personality. And what I mean is that they've always been fans of bands like Virus and Voivod, and maybe the sound before was more comparable to something that was related to Morbus Chron or Execration and something like that. And now they've got maybe a little bit more of those strange ticks that a band like Artificial Brain might have. Now that their sound has evolved a little bit. So there's more technicality available to this record. There are more immediate and abrasive, aggressive riff parts on this album. They're using less free space, and so this is much more of an attack up front and an album that is just very aggressive as it gets started. Now, we do hit some longer songs just like the last record, and this is a fairly packed record in terms of action. There's no real breather for a while, so those longer pieces really are a test of endurance for a lot of listeners. So if you're into the sound, it's a real boon. You get a lot of it here, but there's less of those points of rest that the other one had. I think the description that I used for the last record was it found time to pool and rest, and then give a big performance, and then pool and rest, and it came in stages. They were exploring that sound in a way that felt dynamic and voluminous, whereas this is much more of an immediate, aggressive, forceful presentation that packs the entire record with content in terms of riffs. So comparing it to like Gorguts or the Chasm or even Ulcerate would make a little bit of sense here in terms of the constant action and the grinding of all of the parts at all times. And so I found that really exciting. I think it was a good way to vault off of the sound and the direction of the last one and tell a different story this time. When we do start to reach points of rest on this album, they're fleeting but profound, I would say, and they come later in the record, and they're not necessarily extended moments, but what I kind of comment on in the review is that the overall cycle balances itself out over time. It's not necessarily front loaded with action, but they do balance out the very harsh and direct explosion of it that starts out with some other moments along the way. So the energy does start to wane a little bit. They move into some more of their nuance. And so it isn't an entirely brutal album, but this is in fact an underground death metal record. So in that sense, we do get much more of an aggression to it. It is accessible in the sense that the sound is very sharp, but they're still delivering something that is abstract, avant-garde in some sense, and so the presentation matches that perfectly. I don't have that much more to say about this. I think this is just one of the better records of the year. It is one of the most exciting releases of the year. It was one of my most anticipated. So I do think that it is exactly on par with the last record in terms of the general appeal. I think this is a cool ass record. It's a great death metal record, and there's a lot to really take from it on repeat listens. Really, it's just one of the better records that, to my own taste, for this year. You'll find it very high on my end of the year list, and I've been a fan of this band forever. In terms of their past life as Teleport as well as this group. So nothing but enthusiasm for me for this band and their work, and a huge, very high recommendation for me. It is probably the highest possible recommendation I could give. Take that into consideration and make up your own mind. You can listen to it now. It released on September 13th, and go ahead and read my review for more of my thoughts in depth.